Hello, everybody. As you can see, I'm about to go out for my night on the town, like I do every Tuesday night. But I thought I would teach the class first. Hopefully, you're doing well, hanging in there. I know it's a pretty stressful day for everybody. Um, but we'll use the class for distraction tonight, okay? Somebody asked if I'm a magician. Of course I am. And depending on how things go tonight, maybe we'll do a little magic later on. But I'm not trying to dress like a magician. I'm trying to dress like a beau vivant, a man of the town, a man who knows how to have fun out on the town. So, anyway, okay. So some of you already started taking the exam. That's wonderful. I'm not going to say anything else about the exam. I'm not going to answer any questions. You have all the information you need. I don't want to now, give an advantage for the folks who haven't taken an exam, but I will say this. I can tell you this much. There's 47 questions total. And the folks that have taken it so far, looks like they've done well on average. I can't remember if it's like somewhere between 15, 20, 25 people that have taken it so far, and they've done well. So it looks like the test is within your reach. Just study. Don't forget, it's a take-home open book test, but you have to study because you will not have enough time to look up every answer. Okay, you'll have time to check some of your answers, but not all of them. So it's very important to study, and don't take the exam until you're ready to take it. But you have until Thursday at midnight to do that. So I know today's stressful. You might end up watching a lot of the news tonight. Don't worry. Go ahead and do that. That's important stuff. But then, sometime tomorrow or Thursday, just before midnight, take the exam, and we'll see how folks did. So let's see. Oh boy, here come the questions anyway. I'm not going to answer any specific questions on the exam besides the very kind of general information that's already available to you. I don't want to give an advantage to the folks who haven't taken the test yet. I mean, sorry, the folks that have already taken the test, and disadvantage the folks that have already taken it. I don't want them to have less information. But the one thing I will say about the grading, and I think I've mentioned this before, I guess you do find out your number as soon as you take the exam. So you find out how many you got correct out of 47 total. Okay, that's okay. It's not going to tell you very much because I am not going to assign a letter grade to that until after the entire class has taken the exam. So probably not till Friday or Monday. And I also want to say that I am not actually assigning a letter grade. I'm just giving you some idea of what letter range your grade falls into. Okay, please remember this. The letter grades are not officially assigned till after all the tests are taken for the entire course. Okay, so the first, second, and third, which is the third is during the finals week. After then, we see what the overall scores were like, and then we assign the letter grades. I'm going to give you a chart that shows you your rough letter grades on, I guess, Monday maybe or so, and that will just give you some general idea of how you're doing. Okay, I'll also post the mean number correct answers to give you some idea of how you're doing, and then we'll talk about what to do if you're concerned about how you did on the first exam. Okay, I will answer questions here, but again, not anything specific about the exam. I do not want to give an unfair advantage. I'm a magician. Can you magically make my bad grades disappear, Alex? I wish I could. I look super fancy. In fact, this snap camera filter is called Fancy, as you can tell. I look like the Monopoly guy. I do. Yeah, you can. Okay, so somebody asks, yes, you can. You have access to this slides and all that sort of stuff when you're taking the exam, whether the slides are online or whatever. Okay, that's all it is. Yeah, I'm going to curve after we see how everybody did, but I'm not going to assign a letter grade. I'm just going to give you a rough idea about that. Okay, good luck on the exam, everybody. I think it's very straightforward. You can always look up the answers when you have extra time at the end. I think you'll do fine. Let's leave it at that. All right, so it's time to start talking about a new topic. And that new topic is taste. So let me get rid of this silly fancy filter. And we can start talking about that. Okay, there I am. That's the normal me. Okay. Taste is cool, just like I found smell is cool. Taste is one of these topics that I really hadn't done a lot of reading about because it's outside my area of interest. Let's see how we doing here. Yeah, I think you're going to find this really interesting because just to I guess foreshadow where we're going here, as it turns out, taste is the sense that gets most of its influence from the other senses, right? So certainly we use our tongue to taste, you know that. But you also know now, based on your discussion sections from a few weeks ago, that about 70 to 80% of our experience of flavor, even though it seems like it's on our tongue, actually comes from our nose. And then the other senses also play a role. And so in a way, our sense of taste is the sense that is most influenced by sight and hearing and touch. And so it allows us to not only discuss sense and some really cool things that occur, taste and some really cool things that occur with taste, but it allows us to start talking about how the senses integrate. And I think you're going to find that a really fun thing to do. So let's go ahead and look at our first slide here. Where is it? Uh-oh. Hold on just a second. Why is that not popping up? Okay, hold on just a second. Okay. Let me try this again. No one panic. Everything's going to be okay. Let's share our screen again. Ah, there it is. And we will share computer sound and optimize the screen for a video clip because it's one of the first things I'm going to show you today. So, here's a question I had. Before I started actually reading about taste, before I started learning about taste for the purposes of the book, I had an opportunity to try something really unique. There are restaurants in Los Angeles and I think in most of the major cities of America and Europe, where the kind of idea of the restaurant is to go into a pitch black space, okay, and have a full dinner in that context. So these sometimes are called dark restaurants, black restaurants, or blind restaurants, things like that. But the idea behind them is that there is absolutely no light in the restaurant at all. And these restaurants are kind of advertised as being a way for us to be able to taste our food kind of without the distractions that might normally come in a restaurant that, you know, has lots of folks around talking. So this is, you know, the old days when we could actually have food inside. And so I had an opportunity, and this restaurant was in Los Angeles. It's now since moved to Santa Monica. But my wife and I and two of our close friends went, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what my experience is like after I show you a video of this actual restaurant that's taken from a food show or something like that. So let me do that first. The big question I had, though, before going in, just to kind of anticipate where we're going here, is like the restaurant advertising says, is it the case that being in a dark restaurant allows you to taste your food better? Does flavors seem more vivid? Can you concentrate on the food more because you don't have the distractions of everything else that's going on around you that, you know, that you're seeing? Okay, so what happens? And so let's go ahead and see this little video, and then we'll talk about my experience in this restaurant. Hopefully it will work okay for you folks.
I came here tonight because it sounded different. And they said it's dining in the dark. It's probably a little unique and disturbing, but that's why we're here.
All right, welcome to Dining in the Dark. Y'all make this special.
Oh, thank you, Mike.
Dining in the dark, it's a dining experience in a literally black dining room, dark dining room, where all the food is served by blind servers, and that just makes you have like a totally deeper, greater understanding of the other senses that we all have, but often neglect.
Found my butter knife. Was I any butter?
Yeah, it's in the middle of the table, which is here.
The whole idea of dining in the dark comes from Germany. Ever since that first restaurant got so popular, so trendy, so like the thing to do, they started sprouting all over Europe. I took an American friend and she just said, like, why is the good stuff all...
Oh, sure. Oh, sorry, everybody. Here we go.
All right, welcome to Dining in the Dark. Y'all make this special. Oh, thank you, Mike.
Dining in the dark, it's a dining experience in a literally black dining room, dark dining room, where all the food is served by blind servers, and that just makes you have like a totally deeper, greater understanding of the other senses that we all have, but often neglect.
Found my butter knife. Was I any butter?
Yeah, it's in the middle of the table, which is here.
The whole idea of dining in the dark comes from Germany. Ever since that first restaurant got so popular, so trendy, so like the thing to do, they started sprouting all over Europe. I took an American friend and she just said, like, why is the good stuff always happening in Europe? Why do we Americans always have to travel to Europe to actually go do fun stuff? And then we just like started talking about it, and that's how we came up with the idea to just do this in the United States.
OPEC dining, the blind leading the blind. What the awesomeness of it is, although they can't see, I can guide them into a great evening of dining.
Dunkin' in, either way.
All right. Someone is entrusting me, a person who cannot see, to guide them and lead them into a dining experience.
The server takes them to the table. The servers exactly know where they're going, so the diners, as soon as the door shuts, they are lost. The server really acts as a guide for the entire night. The blind server is like the only person that can actually do their job, because they have like had that disability, which now becomes their ability.
I can't believe, no, you really can't see anything.
Because like you want your eyes to adjust.
No, I know there's no light. I may as well just close them.
I'm not sure.
What do I got?
Some Melrose in Vermont?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that my water?
Yeah.
People really go in there and just have such a blast.
Raise your hand.
They just laugh. They just like, they behave like kids.
Where are you?
You're trying to feed me?
Yeah.
You're awesome.
Warm, cold.
You look awesome.
I love the way you look right now.
At first, when I was walking in, I'm like, I can't do this. I know I can't do this. But then once I got settled, I don't know, it was just crazy. You just like adapt pretty quickly.
There's a complete suspension of self-consciousness. It just brings everything else into sharper focus. I'm on your right with Brett.
When you go to a restaurant, what the experience is obviously the ambiance, you know, to be seen in there. You don't experience that here. It's more of really tasting the food and people's conversation.
This is like an experiment at being blind. It's kind of genius. It really is. It's really I like this a lot.
You're really tasting things. You're really tactile. You're really feeling things. You're really hearing things a little more acutely than you normally would.
Pretty tasty.
It's good.
It was incredibly hard to cut the steak, and then I noticed after a while, I was like, well, nobody can see me, so I just picked up the hunk of steak and started chewing it like a caveman.
Hey, Michael,
Yes.
would you mind helping us and escorting us out?
Yes, I will.
It's almost indescribable unless you're actually, doing it.
It gives your eyes a definite break and allows you to focus on everything else and play with your food, which is always a good thing.
Right.
Coming out, it was like very humbling for me. Like I feel very humble and kind of just appreciative of how easy life really is in a sense for me.
Hey, I'm glad you guys came though. All right, my friend. Well, come back again.
We will.
More than welcome.
Thank you so much.
Remember to come back.
Yeah, Michael's great.
Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about my experience, and I actually write about it in the book, so you can get another sense of what it was like for me. So the big question in here is, does food taste better in a dark restaurant? And I'm not going to answer that right away. Instead, I'm going to give you my experience. So that is the restaurant I went to. It was in, what did it say, the Hyatt Hotel on the Sunset Strip. I'm not sure if you folks are that familiar. It's kind of in the middle of, where there's lots of restaurants and things like that, that hotel. Oh, it's right next to is it the Laugh Factory, that very famous comedy club, for those of you that might know that? Anyway, the Hyatt's there. The restaurant is no longer there. The restaurant, I believe, has moved to a smaller space in Santa Monica. I have not been back. But it was an interesting experience. So we get there, and you kind of go from the lobby into the second floor there, and there's somebody sitting there in front of the reception desk of the restaurant, and she's sitting on a couch, and she has a glass of wine, and she's kind of shaking. And as we're kind of checking in, I say, "Is she okay?" And they say, "Oh yeah, she's fine. She just got a little freaked out by the dark." And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, it is really dark in there, and a lot of times people will come out. And I said, how often does this happen? I said, at least once a night, somebody has to run out and sit in the light for a little while. And I said, do people sometimes not ever go back in after they come out? I said, well, that happens about once a week. Yeah, we lose a customer because it's just too freaky for them. And I'll tell you, it is freaky. I mean, I at this point in my life, I've done a lot of, I've gone to a lot of different places where it is, it's dark, like caves and places underneath churches and stuff. But this is the darkest place I've ever been in my life. I mean, there is no light whatsoever. I remember having the strange experience like that. I didn't really know if my eyes were opened or closed. It was like I tried to open and close my eyes to see if I could feel any sort of difference, and I really, really couldn't. And they do that by design. I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but when the waiter guides them through and then back out, you actually go through a series of curtains, and that just makes sure that no light can get in whatsoever. Before you go in, though, when we were at that desk, that is where you order, because you can't read the menus when you're inside. And you're given three choices to how to order. One is you can order just like normal, where you order everything. You look at the menu and you order everything like you normally would, and you're given a full description. And that is how my wife and our friends ordered. I decided to be a little bit more adventurous and kind of narrow it down to a kind of, not a cuisine, but like a vegetable versus a meat versus a fish dish. And I said, okay, I think I'll just, not know the details, but I'm going to go just for whatever the vegetable dish is tonight, I'll have that without knowing any of its ingredients or any of its flavorings or anything like that. And then you can make the third choice, which is just to kind of bank on your luck and say, just give me whatever they want to give me. And it's kind of an interesting experience, because if you don't know that much about the food, you kind of have to figure out what you're eating as you're going along. So finally we sit down, and I can tell you a little bit. First of all, you're very aware of sound. You're so aware of sound when you realize you can't use vision. And you kind of turn your head a lot to see what, how to best face your table mates and all that sort of thing. You're kind of looking around, and we did a lot of touching of each other's hands so we knew where we were. And it is a very odd experience. It's fun. It is really fun. Like, you saw people having fun there as they were eating. And so, yes, I finally got my dish, and I put my fork into it and picked it up. And it was the case that a lot of times whatever there was there, and it was vegetables, kind of lightly steamed vegetables, as it turns out, they would hit my face. So like I put my fork into, I guess, a green bean, and as I brought it up to my face, since the green bean was kind of sticking out, kind of perpendicular to the fork, it went right into my cheek, and it felt something almost went up my nose. And it is fun. I mean, you're doing a lot of giggling and stuff like that. I wasn't quite sure what it was at first. I could taste it was spicy. I knew that there were steamed, like kind of lightly steamed vegetables. They had texture to them. There was one point, I was eating something that, as I put it in my mouth, was kind of like the length and width and shape of a human finger. I swear it. I swear it. I started getting a little freaked out. I was like, what did they give me? I started chewing on it, and it was a little chewy. And I thought, oh my God, maybe the chef is blind too? No, just kidding. As it turns out, it was a lightly steamed carrot, and it was perfectly fine. I had like kind of Thai seasoned, with coconut milk and lemongrass and stuff like that, vegetables and rice and that sort of thing. And then we shared everything. We tried everything, and we had some bread beforehand. We had some entrees. We each had a different dessert. I had a beer that a type of beer I usually order. And so the question is, what did the food taste like? Well, I'm not going to tell you that yet. But before I start actually going into the research and then come back to that question, I want to see if you guys have any questions about what this experience was like. I know a lot of times people do. And certainly if you've been to this restaurant or a restaurant like this, I'd be very happy to hear from you and learn about your experience. So, is there a difference? Okay, so Roy asks, is there a difference between taste versus flavor? For food, for the folks that work in the industry, there is. For our purposes, I'm not going to really make that distinction, but I think flavor is kind of more the tongue experience, where taste includes being aware of how the texture influences and things like that. It's actually a really interesting question. Today's lecture is not on the test. Yeah, the video's laggy. I'm sorry about this. But Conway, you went to this place last summer? Okay, I'd love if you want to type what your experience is of the food. I'd be very curious to see what you thought. I won't read it out loud. We won't give it away yet. Kennedy says, I would never go to a restaurant like that. I freak out. It is expensive, Alex. It is actually like a high-end restaurant. So, like if you've, had a special date occasion or something like that and have gone into LA and decided to splurge a little bit, that the entrees can hit $30, sometimes even more. It was expensive. Fortunately, I was writing the book, and so I could use it as a little tax write-off. But it is an expensive restaurant. It might have gone down in price now that it's in a smaller location. You might want to look it up. Are people more hesitant? Yes, I think we got there at 7. So are people more hesitant to eat the food? Maya asks, and we stayed there longer, I think, than we would have normally. I think we ate things more slowly. And it was kind of after a while, it turned out, for me at least. I think my wife was a little scared during much of it, but I was able to relax after a while. Maybe the beer helped. But after a while, I kind of felt very relaxed, like more so than I would have in a normal restaurant where you're always distracted and looking at people. I kind of was able to relax by the end of the meal. Okay, did you have anything that I could not figure out what it was? By the end, I could figure it out, but it often took a number of bites, Darpin. So I think we all were able to figure out what we were eating. They had ordered, they knew what they were eating, but what part of the food was what and stuff like that. Yes, they do. Okay, so yeah, Jason's asking if allergies are taken into consideration. Absolutely. So even if you want to be surprised, say, I can't eat shellfish, or, I can't eat peanuts or something like that. Yes, absolutely. They're very accommodating with that. You would think a Corona might taste better, says Jesus. Could be. Did anyone feel sick because they couldn't distinguish what they were eating? No, it really, when people come out and are kind of uncomfortable, it's because of the dark, not really because of the food. Okay. Oh, Conway say, okay, I'm not gonna say what you said here, Conway, but I'm gonna get back to this. Thank you for that input. That's really, really useful. So is your sense of hearing a little enhanced? Could you hear conversations across the room? It's interesting. And I think I might discuss this a little bit in the book. I can't remember how much detail I include in the book on this. When I first sat down, I heard people talking, but it was hard to decipher conversations. Sometimes, when we're sitting in a restaurant, you can kind of hear little, pieces of conversation. And, I don't try to be, snoopy, but I it's kind of fun to hear what people are just generally talking about, just in general. It was very hard to do that at first, I noticed, because, and we'll talk about this later in the corridor, of course, I couldn't see their faces. I couldn't see their mouths move. And what that ended up doing is kind of creating kind of this very kind of homogeneous background sound. So, you know, I don't know if you're aware of this, but like if people are brought in as extras to be at a party, they are actually told to not really produce words as they're pretending to have discussions behind the actors that are really being filmed. They're told to do this. They try to make themselves very indistinct so they are never distracting from the actual dialogue that's been recorded. I can't remember what it's called. It's got a name. I can't remember exactly what it's called now. However, that's what it sounded to me like. It was. I said to my friends, I learned a little bit about this kind of the way they do the background in parties when they do filming, and that's what it sounds like. I said, oh yeah, I know what you're saying. It's really hard to make things out distinctly. Jasmine voted. Thank you, Jasmine. I appreciate that, and thank you for telling me. Okay, let's go through the research, and then me and Conway are gonna tell you what we thought of the food. So what does the research suggest? Does the research suggest that when you are not able to see the food, does it taste better? Okay, all right. Well, I can tell you some interesting things about this. First of all, in research where they test things like fruit drinks, or you've probably seen me taking a sip every once in a while, maybe some of you guys have this at home. This is a soda stream machine. It's from a soda stream machine where it carbonates water and then you put flavorings in. Almost all the flavorings I have, and I get it, you know, online, are clear. Okay, this does not have a color, but it has a flavor. Okay, I know what this one is. It's some sort of banana flambe flavor. It's not bad, actually. It's not sweetened, so it's a more subtle flavor. But all of these come in little bottles of a clear kind of syrup, and when it's put in the water, it still looks clear. And what the research suggests, both in that context and with like drinks, that color and the interpretation of drink's flavor does depend a lot on color. So if you took this banana flavored drink and dyed it red, it would likely taste different to me. And in fact, I might say it's cherry. In fact, color can have a very, very strong effect. And not only that, but the intensity of the color. So how bright a red it is will have an influence on how strong the cherry tastes, with everything else being equal. So there's no other chemical in there to make the flavors taste stronger. It's just the color. What your vision is apprehending has a very strong influence on flavor. And again, remember the big picture here. In a dark restaurant, should food taste stronger? Okay. Let's remember this last thing I said, that the intensity of a flavor seems to depend on color brightness. If it's a more kind of washed out red color, it has less flavor. So, okay, we'll come back to that in just a second. It's very easy to test with things like these soda stream flavors, or like in fruit drinks, like, I don't know, what do you guys drink? Oh, I know, the power drinks. Those are great examples. The Powerade, my kids like those, the Dragonberry, whatever, and dragon fruit flavored ones or whatever. They actually, they spend a lot of time, the manufacturers spend a lot of time getting the color just right, because they know color is going to have a very strong influence on what people, how pleasant or intense people find the taste. So, there's some of these Gatorade drinks that are super strong, they say. And not only do they increase the flavorful sort of compounds, they increase the color's intensity to give it that super strong kind of experience. So yeah, it's important. But that's not just true of drinks. It's very easy, again, to manipulate drinks, but it's also true in cookies and custards and cakes. And so you talk to people in the food industry, and I do some interviews of folks that test foods for the food industry, as you'll see. And they know very well that the color of a cookie or custard or cake, or the texture, the visible texture, will have an influence on how somebody rates the flavor. And this is interesting because I think we have some sense that the mouth feel of a food, the how it feels on our tongue, how it feels inside of our mouths will influence how pleasant something is, and might influence how flavorful we find it. But it's not just that, it's also the visible texture. And they do this in some really clever ways. They have a special sort of bowl that looks like that actually has two compartments. It's kind of like a magician's bowl. And the bottom compartment is filled with one type of custard, and the top is filled with another custard. And the top might be filled with a custard that is very thick looking. But then when they put the taster's straw in, they actually go past the top custard into the bottom custard, which is more liquidy. However, the fact that the tester is looking at the more thick custard influences how it affects their experience of flavor. So here what they're able to do is kind of separate the kind of the mouthfeel texture from the visual texture, and visual texture has an influence on how flavorful it seems. So just so you know how this works for things like custards, if it's a thick looking or thick feeling texture, okay, they have to put more sweetener in it. Okay, it has to kind of offset it. So thicker custards will typically have stronger flavor added to it in order for it to taste sufficiently flavorful. It's not important you know that it works in that direction, but do know that it's not just the texture that we feel with our mouths that influences our experience of flavor. It's the texture that we see with our eyes as we look at a custard or a cake or a cookie or something like that. Okay. And so that's what this means, facilitates a discrimination of custards. So, determining whether or not, two custards are the same can be difficult just from tasting. But if they look very different, it allows us to kind of tune in the flavor differences. So again, sight has such an influence over our experience of flavor. Absolutely. And I should mention that these visual effects are truly perceptual. And what I mean by that is it truly seems like these things are affecting our experience of flavor. It's not like, well, here's my flavor analysis, and now my visual analysis comes after that, and I'm doing something almost consciously where I'm kind of balancing the two. No, it's a direct influence on flavor, one's experience of what they're seeing. And it has to do probably with the neurophysiology, what's going on in the brain as we're looking at different foods. So we do know that there's cell groups in the brain that respond to both tasting food and seeing food, even if we're blindfolded. These cells, if we're tasting something and we're blindfolded, these cells fire off. But if we're just looking at food and not tasting, these same cells fire off, and it kind of supports the idea that our visual system, when it comes to food, is very much tied into whatever sort of neurophysiology is involved in taste perception. And in fact, as you know, smelling is a very, very important part of taste. And we know that smelling of food can actually induce a response in the areas of the brain. I'm not going to put my brain hat on today, but you might know that the areas of the brain back here are the visual areas primarily. And by smelling a food, it actually induces an experience back here in the visual cortex, which is really, really interesting. Now, this thing about vision's influence on flavor, I think to your generation is maybe a little less surprising. And here's what I mean. I mean this in a really good way. You folks probably, at some point, had a cooking show that you would watch at least somewhat regularly. And if not that, maybe you learned to cook a little bit. My generation, unless you were like the major chef at home, we didn't have cooking shows. We had a couple, but Julia Child, but they were kind of considered square. They weren't cool. They weren't competitions, all that sort of stuff. My wife's a real fan of the British baking show, whatever it's called, British Bake Off. She loves it. And she knows, as I'm sure most of you know who've grown up on these shows, that the visual appearance of a food is so important. And think about this. You're watching a show, especially if you're a real fan of these shows, you're watching this show and getting enjoyment out of these shows without ever being able to taste the food. So there must be something in the sight of food that really connects with our, kind of experience of what a flavor is like. There's one other thing I wanted to tell you before I now go back to that original question, and that has to do with blind individuals. Okay, so here's something we're going to learn later on this quarter, kind of as a, an extra as we study blind individuals a little bit more. Or we study temporary blindness a little bit, where people are blindfolded for some period of time to understand how their brains might kind of shift around and start emphasizing the other senses. When people are blindfolded, one of the first things they notice, blindfolded for say a day or two, one of the first things they notice is this, that food loses its flavor. That's also noticed by blind individuals who go through blindness spontaneously. So an accident or something like that. Not losing their vision slowly, but if someone goes through an accident and they lose their vision, quickly, one of the first things they report is that their food tastes bland. Now, fortunately, that does kind of wane, and I think both whether it's the very quickly blinded person or the blindfolded person, even after a few days, they're able to concentrate on other aspects of food. So a blind person who spontaneously went blind, but has been blind for, say, a few years, will say, I now feel that my sense of taste, my sense of flavor is back. But initially, what they say is that flavors are diluted. Let's go back to our restaurant. As we were eating, my friends and I had the same experience. It's like, boy, this food doesn't taste very strong. It tastes kind of bland. And it was everything we were eating. It was the salad or the appetizers. It was the 4 of which we had. We shared them all. We had 4 entrees. We shared them all. And we had 4 desserts, and we shared them all. And we kept on saying the same thing, that, this is a fun experience, but I don't think the food's all that good. I don't think that the chef is very talented. And then I remember having a sip of my beer and then having bread. And we, I think it was sourdough bread, we all said the same thing with the bread. Yeah, no, even this isn't very flavorful. And this beer, which, is a beer I've had many, many times, also tasted bland. And now that you know the research on how important sight is to flavor, and if you quickly lose your sight, how that should affect flavor, you know the answer. Does food taste better in a dark restaurant? No. Now, let's go back to our colleague here who had an experience in this. And here is what he said. So this is, oh shoot, what's going on here? Okay. Yeah, there we go. Conway. And he did graciously answer the question. Okay, so there's a few things here. I'm just going to... shoot, sorry. He said, he said something about he felt the food was a little oversalted, I believe. Let me find that comment. I'm sorry, it's going to take me a second. I really couldn't tell what I was eating, he says. But the taste was somehow were more stronger than what I normally. For example, things seem more salty, and that's really interesting because that's one of the flavors that the chef can add to compensate for what the weakened flavors might be. That's really interesting. So you did have a little bit of a different experience from me, Conway, but. It could be because the chef kind of got some feedback, like, listen, it's a dark restaurant. You need to, you're gonna have to actually compensate for the loss of flavor that naturally comes when you can't see your food for the first time. And so maybe they started salting it more. I'm not sure. I was very careful in the book not to name the restaurant. Now you know the restaurant. It's called Opaque. Because I didn't want to, kind of give them bad publicity or anything like that. But they might have, in fact, now I'm curious, maybe they have learned to kind of compensate. If you look online, the last time I looked online on the Yelp reviews of the restaurant, there were comments about the food being bland. But it could be that they've learned to compensate. If they did compensate, they would have had to add a lot more flavor in some dimension, which might have been done with some sort of salt or some sort of pepper or something like that. Okay. Have I ever had carbonated coffee? Oh yeah, I had that at iced coffee at Starbucks. It was pretty cool. Okay. So David asks, does that go with all substances, just fruit? Yeah. So is it fruit drinks that depend on their color? No, not at all. Chocolate would depend on it too. For example, this is banana, but it's actually banana's Foster, I think. I've got some flavors that are vanilla, some flavors that are caramel. And, I don't know what flavors they are until, I look at the bottle often. It tastes pleasant to me. There's some that taste less pleasant. I don't buy again. But it's not just fruit flavors. It's a good question, David. It took me a long time. These are great examples. Arpitha says, yes, it took me a long time to realize that Fruit Loops are all the same flavor. Me too. It took me a long time to know that the old school jelly beans, which maybe you guys haven't had, the ones that we used to get around Easter time, where there's a black one and then a whole bunch of colors, and the black one tastes like licorice, but all the other ones, even though they're colored all different colors, all taste the same, and they are all flavored the same. You're not aware of that. That's a really nice example. Thank you. End custard discrimination. All right. Yeah, it's a great question. Darpin asks, does this mean that when a chef garnishes their dishes or drinks at a bar, that the food will taste accordingly different because you're seeing that garnish? Well, often the garnish is meant to be maybe sometimes rubbed along the glass. So I didn't know this. I don't have lots of kind of mixed drinks, but sometimes the garnish is there. So you're supposed to either get a whiff of mint or sometimes rub it along the outside of the glass. And then as it's presented with food, sometimes you can break it up and put it on. But it's a good question. I mean, it certainly adds to the appeal. I mean, I think all of us understand that the pleasant visual appeal of a dish makes us like it better. But maybe we never realize that how strong that influence is when it comes to the color of food and the texture, the visible texture of food. It is really, really strong. So if you're blind, say from birth, then you unknowingly don't taste flavor as much. They don't take. Okay, with someone who either goes blind slowly or probably from birth, they learn to concentrate on the other senses for food. Okay, which is very interesting. So it's kind of a way of kind of learning to attend to the other sorts of information your senses get. So I think probably after a while they get used to it. I think there is some research on how long it takes a person who goes blind spontaneously, like from an accident, how long it takes them to kind of regain what they would call their normal experience of food. And it can take I imagine it can take probably months in some cases. I know that in the experiments we'll be talking about later on in the quarter where people are blindfolded for a day or a number of days, I think they do notice it coming back. I don't know if they feel it comes back completely. So the blind, or even the blindfolded in this case, will learn to compensate by attending to the smell a little bit more, maybe, the texture, and, oh yes, you get a question, fine. Okay, let me go, before I talk about the next topic, I'll give you a poll question. These are not going to be on this exam, of course. This is a question that is going to be on your second exam, and I have no idea when that's going to be. And boy, is this an easy one for you. Yeah. All right. So, the question is, which aspects of a food's appearance influences how it tastes? Okay, and the possible answers are its color intensity, visible texture, or all of the above. And we're looking at the answer in the slide you see now. So at least you get a free question for your next test. Great. I'll give you about another 15 seconds. I think this one's very easy. The polls have closed and we have an early result. Florida goes to Rosenblum. You got it right. It's answer is D. It is all the above. So yes, the color has an influence, and it has an influence to the extent where if you have something like an orange flavored drink, you put a red food coloring in it, it will taste cherry, and vice versa. If you have a cherry flavored drink, you put orange in it rather than red, and it will taste orange to people often. The intensity, so how bright that color is, and we discussed the example of these Powerade drinks. The colors will be very vivid. The visible texture, all you need to think about is the custard, and how it's not just the texture in the mouth, it's actually the texture you see, and they have these special bowls that can kind of prove that, through having a different custard that you're actually putting in your mouth versus seeing, and seeing doesn't influence it. So as 98% of you responded, it is all of the above. The answer is D. Okay, terrific. Then let's go on and talk about the other senses and how it influences our experience of flavor and taste. And I want to say something that your TAs did a great job of talking about smell and flavor, and there's more of it in the book. So I'm going to skip smell, at least for now, and talk about the other senses. And this one's probably going to be surprising for some of you. As it turns out, your sense of sound influences your sense of flavor, your sense of taste. So maybe this part isn't that surprising to you. Freshness we can judge not just on our experience of, say, biting down on a carrot or something like that, but it also depends on what you hear. In fact, you will judge how crisp a vegetable is, a fresh vegetable is, regardless of whether you hear yourself crunching it and feel it in your mouth, or you hear somebody else chewing it. So you hear a recording of somebody chewing a carrot or chewing some celery. Your judgments of its freshness, of its crispness, will be the same, which really suggests that we get a lot of our experience of the freshness or crispness of a food from the sound we're hearing. Let's talk about what happens as we chew on a food and how we receive sound from it. Okay, oops. So here's what happens when we hear food. And you might have learned this in other places, that we get sound from our bodies through two different channels. One is the normal channel. So whether, say I'm talking out loud, the sound leaves my voice, it goes around the air, bounces off things, as now you folks know oh so well, and then comes back to my ears. So that's called air conduction. The sound just, goes into the air, and that air eventually, pretty quickly actually, hits my ears. However, when you're making the sound yourself, especially, in the head and upper body, our voices, as an example, actually vibrate through the bones of our skull and then go right into the receptors in the ear. And that's called bone conduction, for the obvious reasons that, the sound, there's I guess a whole bunch of sound that doesn't actually bother leaving the mouth, but actually can be conveyed through the bones of the skull. And you're seeing that in this image here, and then go right into the middle ear. So we get stimulation from sound that we're creating both through the outside, as we hear most sounds, and through the inside through bone conduction. Now, you've probably experienced this. I know most people experience this when they're a kid, but the first time, maybe when you're a little bit older, you're a teenager, and you hear your voice on a recording. Maybe it happens more now because of all the recordings we do, for TikTok and all that sort of stuff. But I remember when I was a teenager, I hated hearing my voice on a recording. We would, record each other for fun and do funny skits on cassette tapes and all that stuff. And I hated hearing my voice. It sounded to me like my voice on a recording sounded really nasally. It sounded really kind of thin. Well, that's how it does sound to the rest of the world. It sounds thin because you're used to hearing your voice, not just through the air like everybody else hears it, but through your skull, which makes it sound a little kind of more resonant, a little, I guess, for the lack of a better word, deeper. So this kind of distinction between air conduction and bone conduction is essentially the reason why you think your voice sounds less authoritative when it's on a recording. It is actually the way your voice sounds to everybody else. When you hear your voice on a recording, that's how your voice sounds to the world. When you hear your voice yourself as you're speaking, okay, you're hearing it in the air, but you're also hearing it through the bones, which makes it sound more resonant, deeper. I sound really, really tough through bone conduction, but you guys think I probably sound like, kind of a whiny teenager, okay? That's the difference. That's bone conduction. So what happens when we're chewing? Let's go back to food. When we're chewing, like on a carrot or celery, you take a bite of a carrot like that. There's kind of, it kind of swaps back and forth. Some of it's air conduction, like when you open your mouth, yeah, there goes the sound, but you're hopefully most of the time chewing with your mouth closed, and that's going to come in through bone conduction. So you are, when you're chewing, kind of, changing the relative importance of the sound you're getting through air and the sound you're getting through bone. Okay, so that's going to have some influence on your experience of food as you're eating. Now, to kind of show that it's an important kind of channel that influences flavor, friends of mine did this really kind of fun experiment. Actually, I don't know if you know about the Ig Nobel Prize, but this is a prize that is given out by Harvard University every year to the weirdest science that was conducted. This thing won, and you'll see why now. What they wanted to do is to see if the sound of crunching, of your own crunching, actually influenced your experience of freshness and flavor. Okay, so I suggested it from what I discussed before, but they really wanted to show that they could manipulate the sound of your own chewing, and it could have an influence over it. So not only is it going to, potentially have a, some effect, but it could be actually, it could have to some degree a dominating effect, because you're getting, your cues about a freshness of a food item, not only through sound, but also from clearly the inside of your mouth, your tongue. I mean, all that stuff's evaluating the crispness of food. But what happens if they change the sound of your chewing and play it back to you in real time? Will that affect your experience of how flavorful and fresh a food is? So here's what they decided to do. They decided to do this with potato chips. And they said, they told the subjects that they were going to get different types of potato chips that they were going to judge for freshness and flavorfulness. Okay. Okay, so different, so the potato chips were all cut to different dimensions and stuff like that. So they were just pieces of potato chip, but they were lying. Okay, what they actually presented to them was the same potato chip. How do you present the same potato chip to a person again and again? Pringles. Pringles are Pringles are Pringles everywhere. Every Pringle is the same in the can. Every Pringle is the same around the world. Pringles are universal. Okay. So they always got Pringles. The Pringles were cut to different shapes and sizes, so they had an experience. They couldn't determine it was a Pringle every time, but they gave them a Pringle. Okay, so here's your next potato chip. Here's somebody in the sound booth munching on a Pringle, and they're blindfolded. That doesn't show that they're actually blindfolded too. As you can see, that person in the sound booth is actually listening through headphones, and what they are listening to is their own crunching, which is being picked up by the microphone that's in front of them. The sound is picked up by the microphone and then goes to a computer that allows the experimenters to manipulate the sound that then feeds back into the subject's ears. It happens immediately. I mean, there's no delay, right? The experimenter adjusts the sound, then gives a potato chip, has the person crunch on it. The subject then listens to their own crunching through the headphones, and their crunching sound is dependent on how the experimenter controlled the computer. And basically what the experimenters did was nothing too fancy in their control of the computer. They kind of changed I guess you could say the treble and bass control, something like the treble and bass control of your home or your car stereo. You know, if you're playing with your car stereo and you want it to sound a little brighter, you turn up the treble. If you wanted to sound with more bass, you turn up the bass and maybe turn down the treble. That's essentially what they were doing. They were kind of changing how bright the sound seemed versus how muffled it sounded, how dull it seemed. And they also did control how loud it seemed at the same time. I should mention that too. And then they had the subject say, what did you think of that potato chip, subject? And they say, well, this is a very fresh potato chip. Or, no, this doesn't taste that fresh. It tastes a little stale. Don't forget, me and you, we all know that they're always getting the same potato chip. They're always getting Pringles, which are always the same. And their experience, and this is what it says here, their experience of its freshness, of its crispness, and to some degree its flavor depended on what they heard as they crunched, okay? And basically it worked like this. It's not too surprising. I think this would be your guess if I had you make a prediction. If I put a lot of treble sound on, it probably would sound brighter, and it would probably make the potato chips sound as they were crunching, make it sound and feel like it was fresher or crisper. And that's exactly what happens. If they kind of turn up the treble knob, maybe turn up the loudness a tiny, tiny bit, then the potato chips seem crisp. If on the other hand, they did the opposite, okay, here's another potato chip we're testing out today. Have a bite of this one. And before we give it to them, we go to the computer and change it. So we turn down the treble, turn up the bass, which is going to sound a little bit more muffled, a little bit more dull, and maybe turn it down just a tiny bit in loudness. And people will say, nah, I don't like this potato chip as much. It's a little stale. It's not very crisp. And I don't like its flavor. It did carry over to flavor, by the way, which is absolutely fascinating. And so by manipulating the sound of someone biting the same potato chip over and over again, they were able to induce an illusion of change crispiness, depending on whether it was a bright sound or dull sound. And in fact, you know, they were never really told just to judge it on the sound or anything like that. They were just, you know, told that they were to judge whether they liked the potato chip and how crisp it was, meaning they were certainly using their tongue, they were using, you know, their cheeks to kind of evaluate the crispness by touch, but the sound of the potato chip, of their crunching the potato chip, overrode the sound of, the feel of the potato chip in their mouth, which is just fascinating. And they won this it's kind of a joke prize, the Ig Nobel prize, but very often there's an interesting kind of scientific story behind it. And here, this is a great scientific story. What they wanted to say is, you know, we think of taste being done by the tongue, flavor being evaluated by the tongue, but yeah, we know that smell affects it. And yeah, we know that sight affects it, but look at this. Even something like sound affects your experience of flavor. Okay, let's go on and talk about this in another way, and this is touch. And I know you have experience with this. And for those of you that do some cooking, for those of you that you know, like watch cooking shows, that is something that is evaluated and can be described. So, you know, in the Great British Bake Off, I don't know if you guys watch that, but I'll watch it sometimes with my wife. And I guess in England, the cookies need to be very, very hard and crisp and almost dry. You know, like when they break those cookies, like, you know, it's like sawdust goes everywhere. You know, it's like these are really dry. And I guess that's how the British, they like their cookies like that. You know, they don't like if it's a chocolate chip or something like that, they do not like the smushy type that I like. You know, I'm maybe a little embarrassed to say that to somebody who grew up in England, but I'm, you know, kind of the soft chew cookies. You know, I think those are kind of great, but no, they don't like it. And so they will evaluate after they taste it, they might, you know, kind of break something. They might put the fork in it. If it's a pound cake, to see if it's bouncy. And clearly what they're doing there is evaluating what the texture of the food is, so that it will be something that will be pleasant, accurate, on the tongue, in the mouth, and all that sort of stuff. Okay. As it turns out, though, it's not just the texture that has a bearing on it. This is really interesting stuff. Talking about illusions, as we just did, where there seems to be an influence of sound on on, you know, flavor, which is, it seems like an illusion itself too. There's something I wanted to tell you about, kind of another illusion, and it has to do with this fact, okay? What we're going to talk about now is just what's happening on the tongue. You know, we all know that smell is going to have an influence on this, but this is asking people's experience of something like sweet, which is evaluated by the tongue. Okay, it is evaluated by, you know, little receptors on the tongue, taste buds, that are situated in different concentrations in different areas, and these are very kind of marked, you know, strong distinctions. So we have a lot of sweet taste buds up in front. We don't have any, or very, very little on back here, where we have taste buds that are really designed to detect bitter and sour and salts around here. So this little figure is pointing to where the different taste buds are that are sensitive to different flavors. Okay, so the question becomes then, why, when you have a sweet candy in your mouth, and say maybe it's a sugar cube, you put a sugar cube in your mouth, so there's no other flavors besides sweet, and you kind of kind of swish it around your mouth, it kind of jumps from one place to the tongue, from one place on the tongue to the other place on the tongue, and it tastes sweet, and it tastes sweet no matter where it is on your tongue. So, you know, if I were to, you know, give you a sugar cube and place it, I guess the way this has to be done is I give you a sugar cube, you put it in your mouth, you know, you suck on it for maybe 3 seconds, and then I have you open your mouth and I take a tweezer and I put the sugar cube back to where the bitter taste buds are, and I ask you, how does that taste now? And you'll say, sweet. And where is the sweetness coming from? It's coming from the sugar cube, okay? But we know there's no sweet taste buds back there, so how does it work? Okay. This is a well-known phenomenon, and it works not just with sweet, it also works with salty things. If I had a salt pill, which exists, you can put that on, you have somebody put that in their mouth for a second, they say, oh yeah, it's salty, and then you take it and put it to the tip of the tongue, the very tip, right here even, where there are no salt taste buds. The same thing will happen. They'll say, oh, I taste salt here, and yeah, the saltiness seems to come from the item that that's in my mouth. This is called tactile capture. And what it really suggests is that as soon as a food item's flavor is determined, that flavor follows the food around in your mouth, even if there are no taste buds there that are sensitive to that flavor. Let me say it again. Once a food is determined, its kind of primary flavor, you know, whether a sugar cube or a salt pill or something like that, and that will happen after having it in your mouth for a few seconds. The flavor of that item will always be the same. It will seem sweet even when we put it back here and there are no taste buds existing back here to taste sweet. So what seems to occur is kind of a perceptual phenomenon, okay? That kind of is almost like an illusion. It's as like the flavor follows the food even if we don't have receptors in that location to detect that flavor. And so the idea is that your experience of flavor will kind of be captured by where in your mouth this food item is touching, okay? Even if there are, again, no taste buds for that flavor. And you can show this with hard candy. And as I said, it's like an illusion. There's another way of showing this, I think, that's maybe even more compelling. And we used to do this in our discussion sections. We can't do it obviously now. It got a little messy too when we were doing them live, but it's very effective if you want to try this at home. Okay, pretend you didn't know where the sweet taste buds were, and you were trying to determine where they were. It's called the sweet tongue illusion. And this is how it works. You take a Q-tip or something like that, and you put it in a concentration of sugar water. Okay, so now you have sugar water on your tongue, and you're told to put it along the outer ridge of the tongue. So say right here, right here. You're just putting it right there, and start. You're not told what flavor is on that Q-tip. Okay, that's done behind you. You're given it. Maybe it's done with a blindfold on. You don't know it's going to be sweet. But now what you do is you start kind of bringing the You touch your tongue with the Q-tip, okay, that has the sweet solution on it, and you bring it around slowly towards the tip of your tongue. And as you're doing that, you give kind of like a description of what your experience is. Well, I certainly feel the cotton. I mean, I can definitely feel that, but I don't taste anything yet. And you continue to bring it around to the front of the tongue. It's like, oh, okay, I tasted sweet. This is a sweet, a sweet solution you've put on this Q-tip. And then you continue to bring it around to the other side of the tongue. And you say, yeah, so I still tasted sweet. Without question, this is a sweet solution that you've given me. And I say, okay, so where do you think your sweet taste buds are based on the fact that you couldn't tell what the item was? You couldn't tell it was sweet until it hit the tip of your tongue. And they'll say, well, I must have sweet taste buds on the tip of my tongue, which is true, but I also must have sweet taste buds along this side of my tongue. So you start over here, I don't taste anything, I don't taste anything, aha, sweet, and now I continue to taste sweet over here and say, okay, so I guess my sweet taste buds are in the front of my tongue and on the side of my tongue. On this case, I guess it would be the left side. That's kind of weird, they're kind of asymmetrical, but that's okay. Say, okay, let's do this with a different flavor now. And unbeknownst to them, what you're going to do is actually give them the same sweet solution. Say, let's start on this side of the tongue now and bring it towards the front. Okay, so you start on this side of the tongue and they will not taste sweetness. Okay, no, nothing. Ah, okay, oh, there, it's at the tip of my tongue now and I taste sweet again. Keep going around the other side of the tongue. Yeah, it's still sweet, there's no question. Okay, so what happened? Did the sweet taste buds jump from from our perspective, the right side of the tongue to the left side of the tongue in between those two experiences? No. It's just that as soon as its flavor was determined by those sweet taste buds, which are just at the front tip of the tongue, from then on in, okay, this kind of capturing of kind of where you're being stimulated, where there's touch against your tongue is going to allow that flavor to follow that item, okay? And it's a very strong experience. I mean, it really is, that even though you don't have sweet taste buds along the side of your tongue, you'd have that experience that you did, because yeah, I taste sweet without a problem now. I didn't taste them on this side, but yeah, I'm tasting sweet, and it's probably as vivid as it would be when it first got detected as sweet from actual sweet taste buds. And this is called the tactile capture, where being touched, tactily being touched, allows flavor to follow the food that it emanates from, even if there aren't any taste buds for that flavor in that position. Okay? All right, this next point I have here says blind spot analogy, and I'm going to drop that. Don't worry about it. It takes too long to explain. I want to make sure I can go through these other points. If you're interested in it, we can talk about it some other time, but let's continue. Clearly, let's go into texture. Texture clearly influences taste. So this is now with people blindfolded and maybe, they're not really listening to food that they're eating. The texture they experience on their tongue, the texture they experience in their mouth, the sides of their mouth, all that does influence how strong something will have a flavor. So a more viscous, and let's just talk about custards again, a more viscous custard will be experienced as having a weaker taste, even though it has the same amount of sugar and flavor components in a less viscous custard. So viscous here means, when I say more viscous, I mean thicker. I said this before. A thicker custard needs more flavoring in order to be said to have the same flavor as a thinner custard. Okay? Yeah, actually, it's interesting. I get, okay, this is maybe an old Northeast Jewish sort of thing, but I grew up eating rice pudding. This is rice pudding that is from downstate New York. My parents grew up there and they love rice pudding, so I like rice pudding. Trader Joe's sells a great rice pudding, and it's pretty healthy as these things go. When I get a spoonful, I hope you know kind of what a rice, but it's kind of like a custard. There's rice in it, cooked rice. And it's very kind of sweet and vanilla-y. When I have a thick part of the rice pudding, it doesn't have as strong a flavor to me as when I have what turns out to be on the sides, the thinner, kind of almost milky part of the custard. That happens as it sits there for a couple of days. It gets milky on the side and thick in the middle. The thicker part has less flavor to me than the milky part. And that is basically almost an illusion where how viscous the texture is that in my mouth is requiring me to have more sugar to taste the same amount of sweetness for something viscous versus something less viscous. So there's a perfect example of that. And if you want, go to Trader Joe's and say, just say, okay, Rosenblum said I had to buy this to try it out at home. I hope you enjoy it. All right, so that works. What else? Temperature. And in this case, we're talking about, kind of felt temperature, meaning temperature of a food item. And this is something that is well known. And you probably know this from restaurants or from cooking. If you serve something a little bit too cold, a little too cool, it needs to be heated up. Oh, I know, this is a great example. I don't know about you folks, but my family is getting a lot of food from Post-it and a lot of food from, Uber Eats and all that sort of stuff. And it's often comes a little cold. Some of our favorite foods are, maybe because of the distance of the restaurant, arrive at our house a little cold. And it's unpleasant to eat something like a fish taco. If it's cold, you have to heat it up. And it's not just unpleasant, but you don't experience the full flavors unless it's at a nice temperature. The nice temperature, by the way, is optimally about the temperature of your tongue. So I don't know, what is that, 98.6, I guess. You put the thermometer under your tongue and you can take its temperature essentially. And it is most flavorful at that temperature. So you're very aware of this sort of thing. But the interesting thing about this is that the influence over temperature on flavor is so important that very small deviations from 98.6, whether it's 2 degrees above or 2 degrees below in Fahrenheit, will change our sense of taste, right? So, boy, restaurants have to be so careful with this, especially high-end restaurants where people are paying a lot of money for what should be an optimal food. They've got a time to make sure when that food is done, it's got to come to the table maybe a tiny bit hotter than the tongue, so you can let it cool off a little bit, but certainly no cooler. In fact, if it dips down even 2 degrees below optimal, people will not have a very good experience of flavor. So yes, temperature, felt temperature on the tongue, felt temperature in the mouth does have a strong influence on our experience of flavor, such that even small deviations, 2 degrees, will make things taste not as vivid. Okay. A couple of other things I wanted to say about this is that there is this kind of fun illusion if you ever want to try it. You can actually induce what we call phantom flavors from water. So, most water, hopefully your water doesn't have a lot of flavor in it if it's just straight water. However, if you cool a water, so it's almost freezing, maybe ice water is a great example, so you can still drink it, right? If people are told that a flavoring has been added into this water, and it could be something like salt or sweet, please tell me what you experience. For colder waters, they will say it's more likely that salt was added. And for waters that are warmer, say, above 98 points or close to 98.6, people will say that tastes sweeter. And there's absolutely no difference in the chemical composition of the water in these two cases. It's just the case that, kind of experience of something pretty cold, for some reason, kind of induces a flavor perception of something closer to salt, and something that goes into the mouth, water, which really has nothing sweet in it, if it's warm, will induce an experience of sweetness just a little bit. Okay. So these are kind of some more of these kind of cool illusions where, in this case, what you touch, the temperature of what you touch can have a strong influence on flavor. It's pretty interesting. Just so you know a little bit about the neurophysiology that's done on this sort of thing, it is the case that the part of your brain that's considered to be involved in taste is in fact filled with cells that are sensitive to touch. Right, so that makes a lot of sense. It is the case that the flavor receptive part of the brain is going to incorporate touch as it incorporates vision and hearing and all that cool stuff. Okay, let's go ahead and take our little break there. I see there's some questions, then we'll do a polling question, and then I'll do one more quick slide. Oh, Alondra's eating carrots right now. Excellent. Hopefully you're able to judge the crispness on the sound. What does, Jason, interesting question. What does the sound of hearing the chefs in the kitchen do to our taste? So hearing them cut up the food, hearing them sizzle the food, that's a really good question. And I don't know if that's ever been studied. This influence of sound on flavor is a pretty new domain, but it has, people have followed up that potato chip study, I know that. I don't know if they've done something where the sound of cooking was tested for its influence on flavor. Very good question. Oh, Maya asked something, yeah. So is this why ASMRs of people eating are so famous? Yeah, that's a good question. I assume you probably know this stuff better than I do. I don't know very much about it. Where there are, I guess, some people, maybe not all people, but some people can listen to certain quiet sounds and kind of get I don't know, how would you say that? Some sort of tickle from them or something like that. Some sort of kind of, I don't know, I don't know if it's a chill or something. I don't know what I'd call this reaction, but I understand generally what it's like. And I guess some of these videos that, kind of are made for people that have this reaction involve eating and drinking to some degree. Is that right? Yeah. So that's a very interesting question. How does this play a role in it? Very interesting question. How much does how much of the chip does the researcher have to eat to find the optimal sound effect for the types of chips? Oh, that's a very good question. So I don't remember the actual study. It's there. You can find it. Just look up influence of sound on potato chip crispness, and you'll find the study, and they'll tell you how they established what type of sound changes they needed to use in order to get their subjects to have a different experience of crispness and flavor. It's a very good question. I don't remember the details of that experiment. Oh, John, I'm sorry. I feel your pain. He can't stop checking the election results. I understand, and we'll be done in just a second, clearly. Rice pudding is fire with a lot of ease. I think fire is good. Yeah, okay, that's great. I'm glad it's fire for you. I'll tell my family I think it's fire too. Thank you. They sometimes use salt to make ice cream. So maybe, salt, I believe, is off in ice cream. Well, actually, you're absolutely right. Some ice creams do use salt in the recipe of the flavor. But also, salt is used to keep the ice intact. It kind of, I guess, it raises the temperature of melting a little. Raises the temperature of melting a little bit, so it keeps the ice intact. But yeah, there certainly are some ice creams that have a salt, so salty caramel, of course. That's probably what you're referring to, Jan. Thank you for that. How does the relative importance change as you chew? Darpen, I don't really have that much more I can say about that. Actually, let me do a polling question very quickly. These are all great questions. I'll try to get them next time. But here's your polling question very, very quickly, just so you have another one. And it just has to do with tactile capture. And here we go. Why does a hard candy taste sweet wherever it is located in your mouth? You have the answer right in front of you there if you look at the slide. A, you have sweet taste buds all over the mouth. B, your taste buds move around to follow the candy. C, tactile capture makes it seem like the sweet flavor is located wherever the candy touches your mouth. Or D, none of the above. I think you know the answer. I'll give you just a few seconds. I realize it's 6:20 now. Yeah, you're all getting it. But I want you to have the answer for your exam. I'll just give you 10 more seconds since we hit the 6:20, and I guess we have to deal with the news. Okay, you're all getting this. Let me just share the results. The answer is absolutely C. This is a question on your next exam, and it is tactile capture, what I talked about in some detail, that allows the flavor to follow the food, even though the food is not touching taste buds that are sensitive to that flavor. Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming to class, and good luck tonight. Stay cool. and we will see you next Thursday. Good luck on the exam if you take it between now and Thursday. Probably a lot of you will. Okay. Bye-bye.